Hey, thanks for coming by, checking me out. I appreciate the support on all the other videos. And, yeah. Hi, my name is Soup. And today, I want to talk to you about pens. Some other stuff as well. I've been doing a lot of writing. And most of the time, I write using a keyboard. But I definitely enjoy these notepads. These kinds of little guys, you know, the little mini notepads fit nicely in your pocket. And get yourself a nice little pen. Easy. Can take notes anywhere. I know we're always on these devices, but it just isn't quite the same thing. I did bring some notes, and be sure to check out the links below to find out where some of this inspiration came from. There's more links in this one than normal. The ballpoint pen. Got one here and here. All sorts of different types. But the real amazing ones are these. They're technically disposable. They're cheap. They can cost as little as like 12 cents a piece. They're pretty amazing. And they kind of changed the landscape of writing in general and the availability of the written word to everyone across most of the entire world. The main version of the ballpoint pen comes from South America. It was made and perfected by somebody there. They were called Biromes. I don't even know how to say that right because I do all my internet research on the internet. And it seems that finding pronunciations for things like that are kind of interesting. But the Biro ballpoint pen wasn't the first ballpoint pen, but it was one of the big ones to make the jumps in innovation and how they were made and how they were going to be used in the future made them less expensive. The first ballpoint pen was patented in America, anyway, in 1888 by John Loud. It's a real name, John Loud. And it was kind of an amazing feat there as well. It was a replacement for the fountain pen. And the reason it's called a ballpoint pen is because in the tip of these things, I don't know if you can see it there, and probably not, no, there's literally a ball, basically a ball bearing. And when you make pressure on the ball bearing, it pushes back just enough to let out a stream of ink from a cartridge that's inside this tube here. And that ink flows downward over the ball and out onto your writing medium. The ballpoint pen really made a lot of things change. The written word, for instance, became immediately more available to people all around the world because of the cheap ballpoint pen. It brought the rise of modern casual style writing. And the fountain pen, which was always utilized fairly specifically and very on purpose, slowly faded out of favor. But the Birome, the first ballpoint pen perfected in South America, was immediately popular. 30,000 or so were bought by the Royal Air Force. And it was used for writing in planes because regular fountain pens were messy and hard to use, and even cartridge-style fountain pens tended to leak a lot. The first ballpoint pens that really got into commercial success were not cheap. In today's dollars, they cost anywhere from $107 to $180, which is pretty insane. It's about $12.50 when they first came out on the shelves. They weren't really meant for the mass market anyway. They were meant to last for quote unquote, up to 2 years, and you wouldn't have to really worry about the mess or the sloppiness of a fountain pen, and you could kind of write whenever you wanted. But it didn't really flatten the availability curve. But then in came an Italian-born French guy named Bic. And Bic really realized that the best way to get some sort of profit out of this thing wasn't sell this crazy new technology for crazy high prices. It was figure out how to make a lot of them, make them fast, and make them cheap. That way, these 2-year lifespan pens seemed a bit more disposable. And a disposable pen is easy to lose, even though a pen just like this may last you 2 years with the amount of ink and the lack of drying out of the ink on the inside and how much writing you may or may not be doing on a piece of paper at any certain time. If it's disposable, you don't care about it as much. And not only can you throw it away when it's empty, but you're less likely to hang on to it before it goes empty. It's the same kind of thing that happens with a lot of modern industrial practices is as it gets cheaper, it gets disposable, even though it's not really something you'd want to throw away. But because of how awesome, incredible, and everywhere it is, you tend to lose it, leave it behind, or not really worry about it when that 12 cents is left on somebody else's desk or in somebody else's car. Writing suddenly became a thing that anybody could do anywhere. The rise of the little notepad came shortly thereafter. Not that there weren't notepads before then, but usually they were bound in some sort of longer-lasting piece because, like leather, you wanted to keep it around because you only really wrote important things in it. If you weren't intent on writing something very specific, you probably weren't writing anything at all, which is kind of important when it comes to the idea of how and why you would use a pen and paper. And as time wore on, the pen and the paper became more affluent around society in general. And instead of black slates and chalk, now students were using pens and pieces of paper. And it kind of spread from there. Things like writing a letter became much more casual and a little less specific in their purpose. That's an interesting thing to think about. The rise of casual handwriting and cursive losing its traction in education gave rise to the written word in popularity overall. Because if it was easy to write something, then it was also easier to get something to read. And you didn't necessarily need to be so affluent to do one or the other. And so with the rise of casual writing, the rise of casual reading came about as well, which is incredibly, incredibly important in the society we live in today, especially times like these where we all have a lot of time to sit around and read. It took me not too long to figure out my signature. My signature is done in cursive. I don't use casual script for it, and most people's signatures are done in cursive. It's probably one of the few things that cursive is really used for anymore nowadays anyway, seeing as its popularity in public schooling is fading away about as quickly as typewriter school and home ec classes and woodshop and all sorts of other tragedies of the education system. But I did make a decision. Because of the laziness of my youth, I decided not to use my full first name and decided to use my first 2 initials and my last name in my signature. It made it quicker. It was easier. It was less distinct because having the initials NJH is a little less specific than the first name Nicholas. Lots of people have the first name Nicholas, but not as many have the initials NJH, or at least this is what I thought in the middle of the 90s as I was signing the backs of checks that I had received for doing my paper out early in the morning, which is really the only reason I figured out my signature in the first place. It doesn't seem to bring about any memories for me. other than cursive writing in school, but my signature, one of the most important fingerprints of my written word, was made up because of a job. Computer technology and the space race really started to change everything. The written word and pens and typewriters gave rise to computers, and computers were really important in our race to space. As IBM began to innovate the Apollo computer launch systems and computer control systems, which now, looking back on, have minuscule power compared to those crazy supercomputers we have in our pockets every day, the written word felt like it was going to get less and less important. But the rise of word processing programs made sure that writing itself was going to stick around. And computers are an interesting thing to begin with anyway. Computers used to be people. We now refer to them as human computers, but computers were the people who did the logical equations and long-form equations for any sort of computations, and thus were called computers. But the things that we call computers today were actually the digital technological replacement for what we now call human computers. A big part of being in space was the research that we had to do while we were up there to understand how humans reacted in space, and we could make it more comfortable for people to be in space. We had to do research, and a lot of research involved writing stuff down. In the beginning, they did use pencils. It's kind of an old myth that NASA spent $1 million researching how to make a space pen when the Russians decided to only use pencils. In the beginning, we all used pencils. But as it turns out, wood shavings, and little pieces of semiconductive flint or lead or graphite, that's the word I'm looking for, really can cause some issues in enclosed environments like a space capsule, as well as be quite the fire hazard, which would come into play later in Apollo 11. What really happened with that space pen was a guy named Fisher. We all know him. He spent $1 million of his own money developing an anti-gravity pen. And after a few trials and errors, he eventually released the AG7 anti-gravity pen. It could write upside down, it had a nitrogen-filled cartridge, and the ink had been slightly jellified so that it was easier to write with and wouldn't spill out in the lack of gravity or high pressure of an oxygenated space capsule. So, no, NASA didn't actually spend $1 million on an anti-gravity pen, but somebody did, and eventually he sold about 400 of them to NASA at a 40% discount because they bought in bulk, and also eventually sold just about the same amount to the Russians during the space race as well. But that doesn't change where the ballpoint pen plays in our society. Even though those anti-gravity pens are really cool, they're not ultra necessary here on Earth. However, writing upside down can be kind of fun. If you ever tried it, I suggest getting an AG7, or at least something like it. There's quite a few hundred models of nitrogen pressurized cartridge pens out there, ranging anywhere from $30 to $150, which again is about as much as the original ballpoint pen cost. But with the innovation of Bic, the price went down significantly. Another really cool thing about a pen is the polygraph. And I'm not talking about the polygraph that we talk about today. You would probably call what I'm talking about a pantograph. But a polygraph was a replicating pen, or what we now know as an auto pen. But an auto pen is the automatic version of a polygraph from before. They were originally patented in 1803, and became really popular for duplicating things. It was basically an arm that attached to a pen that had a pen on the other end. So as you wrote something on one piece of paper, it was duplicated onto another piece of paper. It was used a lot by, and made famous by, Thomas Jefferson for duplicating long pieces that he didn't want to give to somebody else for replication. So he could get a perfect copy of his handwriting on two pieces of paper. I'm sure the original polygraph, pentagraph pens were using fountain pens, but they were easily updatable and usable with a ballpoint pen and continued their popularity until the rise of, well, the space race and the IBM computers, when we could start to store little bits of data and, well, more specifically, bits of autographs. Because one of the most important features of an auto pen, the digitized version of those pentagraphs, is replicating signatures. They were used by presidents for a long time in the White House, mostly secretively, until Gerald Ford kind of blew the lid off of that and made everybody understand what the auto pen's job was. And then when President Obama signed into law, or extended the previously signed into law Patriot Act, he did so from thousands of miles away using a code, the push of a button, and an auto pen. I believe he was 4,700 miles away from where the pen was actually writing his signature. There's a lot of argument as to whether that is actually his real signature on any of that, but according to a couple of lawsuits from the Supreme Court and finally an act of Congress, they do qualify as presidential signatures. But it brings about another idea, the automation, because IBM and many other computer makers have been doing a lot of things to innovate automation, which is basically what an auto pen is the automation of a ballpoint pen. And as the computer size and technology grew, as the space race kind of pushed it along, we became more and more aware of its capabilities, and the silicone chip's expanded powers and processing power unto itself became more and more important. And one of the most important things about that is artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence was made wildly popular through a lot of sci-fi movies and television shows, but really came to prominence with, again, an innovation by IBM called Watson. Originally, it was meant to be an innovator in the medical field, and it was going to utilize combined inputs from all over the world to try and cure cancer, which it still hasn't, by the way. But it became most popular by winning some rounds on Jeopardy, the game show, with the now recently deceased Alex Trebek. It's really interesting that something that was meant to solve the problems of the inner workings of some of the most complex organic beings, cells, really hasn't gotten very much farther than winning a quiz show in the 20 years that it's been around. It's almost sad, really. But it has brought rise to a lot of innovation in a lot of different areas. Companies like Google and Amazon have found other ways to get artificial intelligence utilized in all sorts of manners. If you've ever gotten frustrated by click the traffic lights or crosswalks or bus pictures in your CAPTCHA, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because not only are they proving that you yourself are not a robot, but that function itself is an artificial intelligence all on its own. There's a lot of things I could do to manipulate this video to make you understand about artificial intelligence, but I think you understand what I mean when I say it's really one of the greatest and scariest innovations of humankind. As AI gets better, a lot of it isn't going to live up to what we want it to, which is kind of sad. But there are some really cool things going on out there. Deep Learning and Deep Lens by Amazon was really one of the biggest jumps we've had in recent times. Deep Lens being one of the more interesting of them. It's an artificial intelligence that detects pictures and can kind of understand what's in those pictures. And its original inventor and innovator was utilizing it to find out when bears were ruffling through his garbage. Not so that he could go out there and stop the bears, but so that his wife could wake up and check him out through the kitchen window. Artificial intelligence has uses all over the place, some of them more useful than others, and some of them for strictly entertainment purposes, but artificial intelligence is definitely here to stay. I try to keep a lot of notebooks in my pocket. I have 4 of them hanging out on my desk right in front of me, and every time I clean up my desk, I always leave a space to put some notepads down. But I do have a favorite ballpoint pen. It's the Zebra 301, and I'm not really sure what it is. Maybe it's the little bit of knurled plastic grip here, the fact that it's made out of aluminum, or its fine point that's good for writing or drawing and has a flow to it with its quick-drying ink that even a left-hander could appreciate, including my father. There's just something about the ballpoint pen that gives me a little bit of joy every time I pick one up. Even if I'm just drawing a little circle onto the notepad to make sure that the ballpoint pen hasn't gone dry, there really is a little bit of joy to all that writing I get to do. One of my favorite things about the past year and a half or so, because there's been a lot of not favorite things, but one of my favorite things was convincing my boss at my job to get the smaller notepads. I don't know what it is about the small ones. I guess it makes me feel more like one of the comedians from the 90s pulling out his notepad and writing down his jokes real easy anytime he thinks of them, whether he's in a bar or on the subway. But I love them. The big ones just seem more official. The small ones feel like they're more casual. They're more in tune with the idea of that original ballpoint pen from Bic. I'm not sure where the innovation in pens and writing is going to go. I understand that there's a lot of change going on in the world around us, but I can't really envision where the pen's going to go. I've seen the change in different types of notebooks and writing mediums we can utilize. I've seen these crazy notebooks that are reusable. You can somehow wash the ink off of them and reuse the pages over and over again. Truly mind-blowing. But other than those fun-colored jelly ink pens from the late 90s and early 2000s, I think the ballpoint pen is kind of the peak of innovation for the handwritten word anyway. Which brings me back to that sad point of the death of cursive and calligraphy. I know a lot of people are really into it nowadays. It seems to be the hipstery kind of thing to do, is get yourself a nice fancy fountain pen and write your friends in cursive. Make the calligraphy really pretty. But it's not very popular overall. It reminds me of when I was in my late teens and my dad reminded me that one of his favorite things when he was a kid and in his teens and his early 20s was sending letters back and forth, having pen pals or your family members far away and being able to correspond with the written word utilizing a fountain pen and a simple piece of weighted paper. It seems like a lot of the written word seems to be escaping and nobody understands the art of letter writing anymore, but we still write to each other all the time. The most popular form of communication right now is written texts. in SMS messaging. It's actually the preferred method for utilizing a phone, whose original intention was to connect voices directly, but now it's connected our little notepads directly. Makes me wonder where the innovation in that's going to go as well. I recently got a new tablet, and it has a stylus built right into it. An amazing feat of engineering, and makes me feel really cool when I pull the stylus out and use it. And one of the first things I did was get a little add-on for my texting app that allows me to write in standard handwriting, and it turns it into SMS text. The combination and the innovations of things like the ballpoint pen and the IBM computers that launched the space shuttles and the supercomputers that we use to watch videos like this while we sit on subways that are 100 years old really are culminating a lot lately. As the innovation meets the past and presents the future, I think we're going to see a lot happening. As the artificial intelligence drives the technological curve harder and harder upwards, the rebelliousness of the written word and people wanting to use the old ways gets stronger and stronger as well. So, I know a lot of you have done this already, but feel free, send me a message in any way you wish. You can type it directly into your Facebook Messenger, leave a comment below on this video itself, pull out a sheet from your favorite memo pad and pull out your favorite ballpoint pen, whether it be a Bic or a Zebra, and drop me a line sometime. Drop me a line. Maybe that's what we'll talk about next time. My name is Soup.
Sky over the Atlantic.